Well, welcome to the Equip for Life podcast. We are here with Emily in studio.
Hello again.
For an episode that we've been talking about doing for months and months.
This has literally been on our agenda for an extremely long time. I've just had this document going where we keep compiling ideas, and this one turned into like 2 pages of ideas on just this topic, and then we were like, we have to record it. We just have to.
But hey, the fact that since we're talking about outreach stories, the fact that we waited this long means that we've got more stories
This is
to
true.
tell, and
I
it's
have so many
easier
stories
to tell trends. We've got some trends that we feel like we've been seeing.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't do like an entire just stories podcast that often. But the fact that outreach has seemed so different to us in the last 9 months seems at least interesting. Like, it doesn't prove anything necessarily, but I think that we're seeing some trends and they're worth talking about. And so we're going to go all the way back to late last year. When was St. Norbert College? Is this
that would have been last fall.
October?
Yeah, like October. So our stories
like
are going to span about the last 9-ish months as of when we're recording this. I don't know when you're going to be listening to this, but
me neither.
October.
It might be a while from now.
Fair enough.
There's
okay.
so many in the can.
So basically, we're talking about the school year of 2021 into 2022 is when all of these outreaches occurred. Josh and I were all over the country getting to visit a lot of our affiliate groups. You're going to get to hear about some of them in our stories today. And so that meant that Josh and I were both doing outreach in new places. And for the record, I was doing outreach for the very first time in places that wasn't St. Olaf. You've all heard a million of my outreach stories from St. Olaf.
Hopefully.
But up until,
if you haven't, we'll drop links.
Yes, exactly. There's so many podcasts where I talk about St. Olaf. Literally so many. But this was my first time doing outreach on other campuses. And so that alone as an experience was fascinating. Now we add on to that the fact that Dobbs was happening all this year.
Yep.
There was just a lot of cultural conversation about abortion, and it was on people's minds, I think, more than usual.
Yep.
That made for an interesting year, plus the fact I was on new campuses. So all of that together means Josh and Emily have a lot to talk about today.
We've got some things. All right, so you and I went to St. Norbert College together to do outreach.
We did.
I did a talk, if I remember right. You'd set up, this was part of a crazy tour. It's a crazy week of 6 days.
Wisconsin Right to Life brought us in. We did a whole bunch of speeches all over the state. And one of them, we were at St. Norbert's, which it was one of our affiliate groups. They're amazing. They regularly do ERA outreach. They're all ERA trained. This is going to be a fun...
They regularly do it now. This is their first outreach, right?
Yes, this is their first outreach in a while. They had done some, I think, pre-COVID, but I think this was their first outreach with a bunch of new people that were newly trained because they had a bunch of new club members since COVID, right?
Yeah.
So this made it a little bit of a new experience for them, but also know we were coming into a group that really, had been through the course. We weren't having to teach them things from scratch. We got to just have fun and work with them and help coach them, which was really exciting.
So let's tell a few stories from that interesting day. And we'll start as you set up an outline for this, and you're like, let's just start with the girl who chewed Josh out. So
yes,
this was interesting. All right, so we set up the poll table. We had a way for people to vote. We were doing, I think they had
Starbursts.
They had Starbursts and bowls, and because we've kind of got away from anything where people are writing down their name or email address because there's too many students at this point. If they're pro-life, they don't want to out themselves. And so we just kind of gone with an easy...
seen writing on the table,
even
which takes
that,
a second.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we just kind of gone to more basic kind of voting ways. And it's a little bit harder because then you've got a smaller window to try to catch someone and try to get them in the conversation. But I think the pros outweigh the cons. So we were doing that. So it's the afternoon. We've been doing outreach for a while. I'm tired. I'm sitting on this. We had this little brick wall kind of behind the poll table where where we would take breaks. We had our waters and stuff over there. And so I'm sitting back there. There's other students talking. They're fine. You, I think, had just finished the conversation.
Yes, I was eating a sandwich because it was 2 p.m. and I still hadn't eaten lunch because I talked to 75 people back to back.
It was crazy.
It was insane. That was a very busy outreach.
You were never not talking to people.
And so I got my one moment of break.
Right.
All the students were in conversations and I was like, I need to eat my sandwich.
And you're maybe 2 bites into your sandwich when she walks up. We don't have a name for this girl yet. I don't know.
Let's call her Molly.
Okay.
There we go.
Sure. Molly starts the conversation with something that I've never heard a pro-choice person ask at an outreach. in my entire life.
This was a new one.
To the point that I was stunned, and it took me a little bit to regroup. Like my brain had to reboot, had to Control Alt Delete, and just be like, "What's happening?"
Yeah.
She says, "Are you guys like cheating on the poll? Like are you? I don't remember exactly how she worded it, but it's like,
are you moving starburst?
Yes,
to make the jars look
right.
Like there's a different number of people.
Are you trying to make
voting?
it look like the pro-life side is doing better than before?
Right.
And I was like, what? like, wait, what? You know, I was like, it's in what way? Like, it's just like, this seems like, look, the pro-choice side always wins. It's not even close. It's not even close. Like, there's probably 2 or 3 times as many starbursts in yes, abortion should be legal. Mm-hmm. And like maybe it's like about tied pro-life with the it depends or something like this. But like pro-life side, it always loses.
It has like
it's a
5
college campus. So she sees in her mind, she's like, this seems like too many pro-lifers.
Right. Or the pro-choice side wasn't as full as she thought. She thought the bowl should be like overflowing.
Right.
And instead of like it was halfway full, which for the record, it's a giant bowl and starbursts are really tiny. So there was probably like 50 votes in the yes, abortion should be legal side. Yeah. But that was not enough for her brain's expectation.
It's not like everyone who was walking by was voting. You know, we were getting like 1 out of 4 people walking by to vote or whatever. Yeah. So it's just like, it's not that busy of a thing. And so she's like, yeah, so are you guys like moving like votes from the pro-choice to like the pro-life side kind of a thing?
And Josh has this confused look on his face and he looks at her.
And I was like, this isn't a real poll. Like, this is like...
This is not scientific.
This is so not scientific.
We're using starbursts.
Yeah, that's like that was the thing you said.
That. It was genius.
I literally laughed. That's right. Yeah. Emily's like, we're using starbursts. It's not a real poll. If you're using starbursts, it's not a real poll.
What part of you thinks this is scientific? Right. I'm sorry.
And so I made a decision as I'm finally responding to her bizarre and semi-offensive accusation. I made an intentional decision. I'm going to curse. So let's sidebar a little bit.
Sidebar.
Everyone has different feelings about this, and I understand that. I see this as like in the personal conscience territory. Different people have different. I think there are multiple interesting, just Christian views on cursing, and I'm not, super strongly opinionated about mine. I might be wrong. I am open to people correcting me, but generally speaking, on the Christian spectrum, I'm probably fairly on the far liberal end of the spectrum when it comes to the way that I think about the morality of saying curse words in general. I'm thinking like I don't think that we should offend people, so I'm very choosy about who I curse around. But like just to pull the curtain back, like my wife and I, just when we're joking around with each other, we curse all the time. Like this is like part of the humor, and we don't see anything wrong with it. Maybe we're doing something bad. Maybe we're harming our souls. I'm not convinced, but maybe. Regardless,
sure, you're open to it.
Regardless, it's a thing. Just kind of like we talk about, like the fact that I have some beliefs on social issues that are more libertarian or even liberal. Sometimes, like I intentionally use that on the college campus to try to find common ground. I do the same thing with cursing sometimes, and in this case, she was starting at 100, like just like in attack mode, which is very unusual. And I made a call, and so as I'm explaining, we'll bleep this out, but you're gonna be able to tell what it is. But I basically said, like, okay, it's like you say we're using starbursts, it's our RuPaul. I'm like, the whole point of this thing is just to get people to come talk to us. We're trying to help create dialogue, and we have found an effective way to do that is to start with something like this, where people can give their opinion, and we'll ask their opinion. This is not a real poll. The results aren't getting tallied. There is no reason why I would with the votes. And so she kind of like, okay. Like, she kind of like...
I could see her face change just slightly the moment that you swore.
As soon as I did that, there was a 1% softening towards me, but at least...
I don't know if I would call it softening. I would call it fascination.
Yes.
There was a 1% Well, that wasn't what I expected.
Fair. That's fair.
That's different than softening.
Right.
That's just now I'm intrigued by you.
She never softened.
No.
Okay. That's a good point. But that's like the point of it. Is like I'm trying as hard as I can to get myself very quickly out of whatever box he has me in, which is probably like hyper conservative. Like my wife has a head covering at church. Like, we've got 10 kids. Like, and I know there's people listening that have all those things. It's fine. I'm just saying that is her perspective, and that I'm going to have a very rigid, like there's going to be no common ground. And so as soon as I do that, there's a little bit, I'm a real person now to her, at least a little bit, at least is the hope. So go ahead.
As another quick sidebar to that, there is something that I've just recently started doing that I think is really related to this idea.
Interesting.
Because I have been working with our affiliate groups for the last year now. We've had that program live for a year, and we've got 32 clubs all over the country, and most of them are regularly doing outreach at this point, or they're very close to being ready to do that because they're still going through the Equip for Life course. Yeah. And I always have a pre-meeting with a group before it is their very first time to do outreach. I'm meeting with all our groups regularly, but we have a specific meeting that we schedule that is like the outreach pre-meeting.
Right.
So if you're going to go do outreach the first time, here are the things that you need to know that are not in the Equip for Life course. Yeah. Like, let's do some crash course in just how to do an outreach well. And one of the things that I have started deliberately training all of our clubs in doing is what you should use as your opening line when someone is like, what are you doing here? What is this table? What is this thing? And oftentimes I won't even say this line only when I'm prompted. I'll just say it, period. If I invite someone over to the table, I feel like I owe them a little bit of an explanation of what the purpose of this is, because otherwise they're just confused. And I want to kind of like get their wall down by just giving them a feeling of comfort, of this isn't some big scary thing. And so my opening line, and I literally train our affiliate groups to memorize this line, is this. Hey, we're just here trying to create more productive political dialogues on campus because I think people really suck at talking to people who have different ideas from them.
Is that how you say it?
That is exactly how
you put a lot of you put some stank on the word suck. So that's a little bit different than how I first came up with this slide. Yeah.
Yes. So, and I do it for two reasons.
Yeah.
A is the exact same reason that Josh just said. It immediately changes their perception of me because they're expecting some like crazy conservative girl you're trying to like evangelize to them. Right. And as soon as I say, I think people really suck at talking, like suddenly they're like, oh, wait a minute. She's not what I thought. Who is this?
Midwestern girl.
Yes. Like what?
What? Suck at me.
There's just an immediate intrigue that happens.
Yeah.
The second reason I do it is because I have never, ever said that line and not watched them agree with me.
Yes. Yep.
Everyone knows
easy common ground.
People disagree way too much. They're not able to talk about controversial issues. And so sometimes they'll like chuckle a little bit and kind of nod. Yeah. Sometimes they'll be like, yeah, you're totally right. Yeah. Like they will do something physically or verbally where I can see we're on the same page about this. We both agree this is a problem. Yeah. And both of those things instantly bring that person's wall down. Yeah. And so just to like pull back the curtain about where I am on swearing, because this is like, that's kind of just fun for the audience here. I am definitely further, I guess, on the conservative side of it than Josh. Yeah. I have never said the F word in my life. Like actually have not. People are shocked by that.
That's interesting.
But I don't have a problem with like quote unquote lesser words, especially when I use them for a purpose. I'm not a person that's just going to throw around suck in every sentence or other like lesser words. Yeah. But in this case, I'm using it very intentionally. Yeah. I know what I'm doing by using it. I know what the word means. I know like whatever. And I am using it, not just like throwing words around like they don't matter. Yeah. And so I don't have a problem with that. Now, I have coached some affiliate groups that did have a problem with it. I've had specific students who are like really on the side of we shouldn't say any kinds of even like smaller swear words, anything like that. And if that's you, I don't have a problem with that. If you want to reword my sentence and say something else, like I think people are really horrible at talking to people that have different views. I think it gets rid of some of the effect. I don't think it's as good in terms of reaching those goals. Yeah. But as long as you're making the decision intentionally, and there's other things that you can do, maybe with your body language or how you say the words or how you rephrase it.
What you're wearing.
What you're wearing. Workshop it to try to figure out how you can effectively do those same two things I'm trying to do. Immediately be a person they're not expecting and get them to find some instant common ground. Get them to laugh a little bit and bring their wall down.
There's even a third thing going on with that statement, which is part of intentionally why I started doing this pretty early at our outreaches. was you're also pointing at a thing that both sides could be better at. You're not just being like, pro-choice people are so bad at making their arguments, so we're going to invite them for some practice. Like, it's not like that.
Right.
We're kind of like, everyone's terrible, and we're trying to make things better. We're trying to be part of the solution, which can help. And you can do that part even if you don't say the word suck.
Yeah. So we've sidebarred like 6 times. Back to the story. Yeah. I'm sitting here eating my sandwich. Yeah. Josh has this girl attacking him.
Right.
And he chooses to swear.
Right.
We're back on.
So we move from there, and basically once he gets off of the you're doing election fraud thing before it was even a cool topic. Not so cool. Before she goes there, she basically now she just goes into a line of questioning that felt like an interrogation at best. It seemed like she had Googled 20 minutes ago hard questions for pro-lifers, and she memorized like 9 of them. And she came ready to go with all of this stuff in her back pocket. Yep. So I think she starts by asking me about rape. And so,
Shocking.
Of course,
Classic.
I go into, I'm doing the whole compassion thing. I'm acknowledging how horrible rape is.
And that's about as far as she let you go.
Yeah. She would not let me get to the argument, or she didn't like that I was doing all this compassion stuff. It was like, I think she was trying to get me to like, just like skip that, what's your real answer kind of thing. And I just like, that's just one of those things, I'm not going to skip. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to, I learned this from Steve Wagner. So Steve had an experience one time where someone was like, you have 10 seconds to tell me why you think abortion should be legal in the case of rape. And he just said, no. Like, and I loved the way that he said it. He said, there is no way for me to give proper respect to all of the parties involved in that situation in only 10 seconds. Like, I need at least a minute. If you give me a minute, I'm going to give you a very real answer to that question. But like, I like that it's like, there's some kind of pushing around that we're not going to let ourselves be. And they would love to be able to push us into making a worse response that seems less compassionate, so then they can jump on us. It's like, no, we need to do some common ground first. And I need you to kind of hear where I'm coming from. And then it'll be easier to understand like the way that I think about abortion legality. And so she didn't get from me what she wanted from that. And so she quickly jumped to another topic. Do you remember where she went from there?
I'm pretty sure she went to You're a Man.
Yeah, probably. So then I start doing that thing. And our response on that is super effective. We've picked it out of like, I don't know, a half dozen different ways of responding to that. And this is the one that we found to work really, really well a lot of the time. But as this young woman proved, it doesn't work with everybody. So like, it just seemed like every time I give an answer, what I was perceiving on her face was a frustration that she had not yet accomplished her goal. And now she was going to like come at it from a different angle. Like there was never like really a response to what I was saying.
Oh, no. It was just, let me ask you another question.
Yeah.
Because I need to eventually find the thing that makes you look stupid.
Yes. I'm going to trap you. And I've got 6 traps ready to go. The first 2 didn't work. So I'm going to try number 3 now. And she jumped to another thing. And I don't remember what all of them were.
It was just rinse and repeat this cycle.
It was
where she would let you say maybe 2 sentences. Yeah. And then usually she would interrupt you with the next question. It's not even like she waited for you to finish your thought. It was just, he's not responding the way I want, so let's just cut him off. And now I know where he's going. Let's go to another question until I accomplish my goal.
And I don't feel like, if I remember right, and your memory is a lot better than mine, Emily, but like in my memory is in that time, like as long as she was there, I don't feel like I got like frustrated or angry, or at least showed any kind of frustration or anger. I was like completely in this, like, I know this is basically like a PR interview and I'm treating it like one. I'm being as nice as I possibly can. I'm sort of like, I'm just responding to the question. I'm like, good question every time she asks a question. And I'm just like going into it, and yet nothing's working. And by the end of it, she just kind of walked off. And I remember saying like to our group as we debriefed later, is like, this might be the first time I've had an actual conversation with someone for more than like 10 seconds where she didn't leave liking me any more than she did when she walked up. Like usually I can get people to be like, okay, well, I kind of liked how he answered that question, or he's different than what I thought, or whatever.
He's maybe reasonable.
Right. Nothing. I didn't budge her an inch, and that was frustrating. And I certainly felt internally frustrated, especially as she walked away. Just like, what was the point of this? And not liking that. But yeah, that's what I remember about that story. That was something.
Yeah. So a few months later, I was actually back at St. Norbert's. So this is another St. Norbert's story, but not from the same outreach. I did not see her again.
It's like, where are you going?
No. I'm moving us on.
Okay.
I'm moving us on to another story.
Yeah.
So I went back to St. Norbert's the spring of this past year, and it was just me this time, as opposed to it being me and Josh the first time. Yeah. And I also did a public speech, and I did another outreach with the club. Yeah. And I had this really fascinating experience that definitely we're going to quickly come back to at the end when we talk about some of our big takeaways, because this for me was probably one of the biggest takeaways of the year. And I was kind of standing there ready to have another conversation. I just got out of like 3 conversations, and I could see this group coming from a mile away. That happens to all of us sometimes. Like if you've ever done outreach, when there's a group,
you can see it.
You can see it. And there's probably, 7, 8, 9 pro-choice people in this kind of like mob that are walking straight at me from all the way across campus. So it's like a 30-second walk.
This is like my story. I can see her from a block away. She's walking up. Yeah.
It's classic. It happens all the time. So they walk up and they essentially fan out in front of me. I'm sitting on the table on the yes side. Should abortion remain legal? I'm like sitting on top of the yes. And they walk over and they fan out and make a semicircle.
Wait a minute. I've got a question for you. Wait. You're sitting on the table.
Yes.
Now, if people haven't seen video of us standing next to each other, we are not remotely the same height. I'm like, what, a foot on? I think I've got a foot on you, about 6'2", maybe 6'1.5".
Okay, yeah, I'm 5'1", guys.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got a good foot on you.
Yes.
And it's kind of humorous.
It's really funny.
Kind of Abbott and Costello kind of look.
But I look like a college freshman. It's
you
great.
Do.
No one thinks that I'm an adult.
And I am now past that stage where I can pass as a college student. So that's too bad. So part of the reason why I am always sitting on the pool table is to get myself shorter. Because I'm wanting to try to get my eye line as close as I can with any kind of short person I'm going to be talking to. I'm legitimately wondering, are you sitting on a table because it actually gives you some height? Are you taller?
Yes. I am taller when I sit on the table.
Do you have to like jump up on it a little bit?
That's correct. Usually. It's like one of those you'd put your arms behind you and kind of hoist yourself up just sitting on the table. Sometimes the table will be shorter than me, but I would say most of the time it's not. I would say I do it for 2 reasons.
Because it makes you look relaxed too, right?
Okay, 3 reasons. That wasn't a reason, but that should have been on my reason list. So it makes me look really relaxed, A. B, it gives me some height. It makes them not know how tall I am. When someone's sitting, because like I'm often sitting like cross-legged on the table, I've got like one leg hanging off one arm. You don't notice how tall someone is when they're sitting like that. No. And like I don't care about people making fun of me for my height. I truly don't. I make fun of myself for my height all the time. Yeah. But there's something about like I look more like a college student, one of their peers, when they're not focused on trying to guess how old I am or like whatever. Like there's just something about sitting there that just they don't even think about, oh wow, she's so short, or does she actually go here? Is she a high school student? I've been mistaken for a high school student. So
that's what I was going to ask. Are you worried about them thinking that you're more like a 16, 17-year-old like on a mission trip or something like that?
I don't think I'm actively worried about that. I just want them to not notice.
You're just looking to remove distractions.
I'm looking to remove all distractions. And so sitting on the table does that. It makes me look relaxed. It takes away any sort of distraction about my age or my height or anything like that. Right. And also, thirdly, it's just plain practical. If I'm out there doing outreach all day long, my feet hurt. Yeah. And like it is way more comfortable to sit and have a conversation sitting on the table than to just like stand there.
Okay, I'm glad that we did this little tangent. I wouldn't have gone here if I thought it was even possible for you to get offended. I know you can't get offended.
Yeah, no, I don't get offended.
About your height. But okay, but I've never asked you that, and I'm so glad that I did on camera.
No, people do legitimately mistake me for being younger than 18 many times. So other really fast sidebar. People who know me know that I was an education major in college. I was music ed. And so I have I student taught in a high school for a full semester. And I would get mistaken for being a high schooler all the time. And I very quickly learned that the only way to prevent that was by wearing my keys. Right. Because, you see, the one thing I particularly hated about my high school, and this is true of a lot of high schools, but my particular high school where I was student teaching, every Friday was casual day for the teachers.
Oh no.
Which is...
And you can't do that.
I can't. People don't understand how much I cannot do that.
Yeah.
Because casual day, you're supposed to wear jeans and like look. And I'm like, when I do that,
yeah.
I look like a high school student.
Yeah.
There's a reason that I taught every single day in a skirt and heels.
Yeah.
Every day.
Yeah.
Because that is the only way I looked like an authority figure to my own classroom and to the rest of the room. And so Fridays, I learned like the first 2 weeks I didn't participate in Casual Friday. And I learned that that was not really socially acceptable as a teacher to not participate in Casual Friday. No. And so I had to start participating in Casual Friday. And so what I would do is I would just wear my lanyard of all my giant thing of teacher keys the whole day on top of my outfit. And so if I had to like go to the bathroom, no one would stop me if I had my lanyard that made me look like I was a teacher. Because I have all the teacher's keys.
Right.
And so I'm like wearing a sweatshirt and jeans, but the teacher keys. And that's the only thing I could do to prevent myself from being stopped and like asked why I wasn't in class.
Yeah. Wow.
So
that's really smart.
Pull back the curtain. Being 5'1" is not all it's cracked up to be.
No. There's challenges. There's definitely challenges. Okay, go back to your story. So you're sitting on the table.
I'm sitting on the table at St. Edward's. Wow, we got off track. And this group comes running up to me, basically, and they like fan themselves out in front of me.
Yeah.
And the first words out of their mouth, they have like basically elected a spokesperson.
I was wondering about that.
Yes. Yeah. And the person looks at me and says, "Why are you pro-life?"
Okay.
Which I'm like, first of all, that's not usually a normal question to be the first thing to come out of someone's mouth because they don't even usually know I'm pro-life.
Right.
When you're staring at a table and the question says, should abortion remain legal?
Yeah.
Like you could guess maybe, but it also looks like it's maybe a class project. Right. It's some sort of
But just maybe they've seen the same table before.
Yes, which is what I'm suspecting, connected before. Or maybe one of their friends came up and talked to one of the people earlier. Yeah. So they clearly know I'm pro-life.
Yeah.
And so rather than doing my usual opening line, if we're just trying to hear great productive political dialogues on campus, I think people really suck at talking about difficult things. Like, I can't say that. Right. I have to just launch into my pro-life elevator pitch. And if you've been following URI for a while, you would know that a few months ago, we published a new blog post. It was actually written by our friends at the Minimize Project in Ireland about why we are revamping our pro-life elevator pitch.
Yep.
It used to be a pretty classic pro-life elevator pitch. Like, I would say, well, we know that the unborn are alive because they're growing. We know they're human because they have human parents. And I think all humans deserve to be protected from violence. And so I'm against abortion. You know, something along those lines. Yeah. And this amazing idea that Murren, is that how you pronounce her name?
It's hard. So I did a podcast with her and Ben, and when I was in Ireland, those were kind of the two kind of leaders of Minimize Project. Yeah. And they are fantastic. And so I'm not very good at like rolling my tongue for accents, but it's like Mirden. No, that's not it. That's way off.
I'm sorry, Murren. We're not going to get it right.
I just know that we're doing it way too American.
I'm sure we are.
She's super cool with it. So Murren is about the closest that I get without like really struggling.
Okay, we're going to go with that. Yeah. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. There is a better Irish, beautiful way of hearing real Irish people say it, and I'm horrible at accents, so I just can't do it.
I can't do it either. Okay, so anyways,
but it's so
she
good.
wrote a good post for us.
It was so good that we're just like, this is going to be our thing now. We're just going to like, this is,
And so the new elevator pitch is basically quickly summarizing both personhood and bodily autonomy all in one statement. And it goes like this. I believe that abortion is a conflict of rights issue. There's inherently this conflict between the fetus's right to life and the woman's right to bodily autonomy. I know that the fetus has a right to life because it's biologically a member of the human species, and I believe that all humans deserve to be equally protected from violence. And I also think that bodily autonomy is incredibly important, but I don't think that bodily autonomy can give you the right to kill another person, like in the case of pregnancy, if you're not allowed to do that in other cases, like a case of conjoined twins. And so society has a lot of conflicts of rights. It doesn't mean that one is more important than the other, like one person's more important, but does mean that one right has to trump the other. And so that's why I think the fetus's right to life would outweigh a woman's right to her bodily autonomy.
It's so good.
It's so good.
You're bringing in you're the first one to bring up bodily rights arguments, which is awesome. There's so many little things that you've thrown in there. You've summarized the equal rights argument, basically.
You've summarized bodily autonomy. You've sort of
done I mean, you're like on your way into you can either help or kill, but you can't not help territory, or you can at least quickly refer back to that basically, because you're going into bodily autonomy doesn't give you the right to kill someone.
Mm-hmm.
It's so really good.
So I've been using solely that elevator pitch for months now.
Yeah.
All right. That's not actually where the St. Norbert College story is going. It sort of is. But so I'm used to people asking why I'm pro-life like later on in the conversation, and I will give that new elevator pitch. It's ingrained in my head. I've been teaching it now to all the affiliate groups. It's another part of my pre-outreach meeting is I have them practice that elevator pitch a million times over, so they're really comfortable explaining it.
Yeah.
But in this moment, in my split second sitting on this table, I've got this fanned out group of pro-choice people, and they, in the most hostile way possible, ask me why I'm pro-life. The inner monologue in my head goes, well, I definitely can't use the old elevator pitch.
Right.
But I also don't want to use the new one.
Ooh, why?
Because I realized that in that moment that I think the powerful thing about the new elevator pitch for Minimize Project is that the first words out of your mouth are abortion is a conflict of rights issue. Yes. Like that's the really good sentence you want to get out there. And that's intriguing.
Yes.
Because it shows that you thought about this from multiple perspectives. And then you get to go on and make the rest of your statement. But that opening sentence immediately kind of intrigues the person listening. In this event, I wasn't convinced that they were going to let me get past that first sentence.
Interesting.
Because they were so hostile looking. Like, I can't adequately describe how hostile looking they were.
Yeah.
Like, I was pretty sure I was going to get run over if I said anything that wasn't exactly what they were, like, wanting me to say. If I wasn't like, oh, no, I'm actually pro-choice.
Right.
Like, if I said anything other than that, I could get run over. So I was like, I'm not even sure I want to go with this new one. What I'm going to do is pay very close attention to the very first words they hear. Because if that's all that they give me time to say, that matters.
Interesting.
And I think I can use that to make them give me more time.
Yeah.
And so what I did is I took Marin's elevator pitch and I flipped it. I literally flipped the order. I started, the very first words of my mouth were, I think women's bodily autonomy is extremely important.
Oh, that is so genius.
And
oh my gosh.
They were like, what? Like I watched confusion, just complete confusion. Because now they're like, is she pro-choice?
Right. Now
we were wrong.
Sure what's happening.
Yeah, they're like, literally what is happening? And so I watched their face go from upset to confusion to just like silence. Like they just went to TV static in their brain and like just gave me this massive opening. Or they like, I could just tell by their body language, they're like, please continue.
Yeah.
Are we in agreement? What's going on here?
Yeah.
And so then I basically gave Marin's whole elevator pitch after I said that. I said, I believe that women's bodily autonomy is incredibly important. Essentially, abortion is a conflict of rights issue between women's bodily autonomy and rights that I think a fetus should have. Yeah. And then I backed up and I gave the whole rest of it that I just gave 2 minutes ago on this podcast. Yeah. But I was really careful about what the very first thing I said was. And that made all the difference. I ended up talking to these girls for 45 minutes after that, when I was pretty sure that they were going to kill me in the first 2 seconds. And at the end of it, all of them, universally, were looking at me and saying, wow, I actually respect your view so much. That makes so much sense. Like, I wrapped up the whole conversation by bringing it back to that elevator pitch, by re-explaining why I thought the only logical way to make sense of the personhood that we did go talk about, the bodily autonomy we did go talk about, was to ultimately be pro-life. Yeah. And that was fascinating to them. And I think if I hadn't made that split-second decision to really pay attention to what the very first thing was they heard, I probably would never have gotten that 45 minutes to go through and make all of those arguments and leave in a place where they were just plain fascinated by my existence and way more open to being pro-life. And so I wouldn't recommend that pro-lifers use my new inverted elevator pitch every time.
Right.
I don't think it's as good. It's not as clear, like, logically as saying abortion is a conflict of rights issue. Let me explain one side of the conflict. Let me explain the other side of the conflict, and therefore this. I think Marin's is way better than mine, logic-wise. And so that's still going to be what I use probably 90 to 95% of the time. Right. But having this alternative in my back pocket of when someone is incredibly hostile, flipping it and paying attention to the first thing they hear, I think made all the difference in that conversation. And I can imagine future conversations where I'm going to be glad I thought of that, and I'm going to try whipping that out.
That was incredibly brilliant.
Thank you.
That was so smart. And I don't think, I don't know that I would have come up with that in the moment. I think I would have struggled. And now it's like, oh yeah, that's exactly the first thing that person needs to hear. One more St. Norbert call us before we move on to other places. We have an outreach at other places. It's just that,
we have a lot of stories from
St. Norbert first.
Yeah.
So going back in time, the time that we were both at St. Norbert, the only other real substantive conversation I had, because most of my day was more, we really wanted the students in the club to be able to get into conversations. And so my thing was like, of all the people here, including you, I am the least important to get in conversations because I have the most outreach experience. And but let's like make sure like we want to give this club like a really good outreach experience and show them that it's not as scary as maybe some of them were worried that it might be. And let's just kind of help them. As far as mainly like, I'm taking walks with students like around this building, coaching them, doing debrief, coaching, answering questions. Like that was my role almost the whole day. But I did end up in a conversation with this young man who I don't know if I've ever talked to someone who bit more bullets than him. Like we talk about people biting bullets. Episode 1 of this podcast is on what to do when people bite bullets. And I had to like try all of those things with the student because he was a really tough nut to crack. He was a straight up utilitarian. He was ruthlessly consistent in it. My normal kind of attempts to get him off of utilitarianism didn't work. And he just kind of bit all of those bullets. And ultimately he was like defending infanticide. Like it was like, I don't know that newborns should have a right to live. And so like I'm working with that, and eventually I'm like, hey, well, let's see if I can find the edge of his view. And just like and we've talked about this before, but it's just like this is a real quick reminder. This is something that both sides do. And yet both sides get really defensive when the other side does it to them too. And so just like as like pro lifers get really frustrated. Why is always the first question I get asked is about the case of rape? It's the same reason why the first question you probably ought to ask is what do they think about late-term abortions? Because we're going to start by trying to, I think of it like cartography. You're going to find the edges. I don't know if this is how cartography actually works, but I imagine it does.
Yes.
You're going to find the edges and kind of and fill in the middle. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to try to figure out the edge of this guy's because he's totally fine. He's happy to be talking to me. He's not in a rush. But I can't get him off of the idea that we can kill newborns. And so clearly I'm not going to get him on embryos yet. So I'm like, okay, like how far does this go? Like I'll follow this train. And so I start asking about older and older children. And he keeps on biting every bullet. And I'm just like, so ultimately I asked, okay, what about 17-year-olds? Can parents choose to euthanize their 17-year-olds? And he said, yes. Parents should be allowed to. Now, he meant it. Sometimes we talk to people and they're just saying stuff that they don't mean because they don't want to lose the debate or because they just feel like they need to be. Like, that wasn't this kid. I think this is one of the people I've talked to who had already thought a bit about his moral worldview or his utilitarianism or whatever and was just carrying it to its logical conclusion. He was being incredibly consistent. And he was just like, yeah, I don't see a reason why parents shouldn't be able to kill their 17-year-old kids. Now, this is the point where his argument started to get a lot worse, though, was because then I asked him about 18-year-olds, and he said, no, parents shouldn't be able to kill 18-year-olds. And I said, why? And he said, because I'm 18, and I wouldn't want myself to be able to be killed. And I'm like, dude.
That's not even you could make a slightly better argument by saying 18 is the arbitrary time at which we've decided to be an adult.
Right.
And now
that would have been way more interesting.
That's still bad, but it's way more interesting
than
because I'm 18.
It's the most flagrantly ad hoc move I've ever seen someone make in my life. I am just going to completely and he kind of laughed. I called him on it and I'm like, you can't pick your position based on how old you are. And he kind of laughed. He's just like, this is my view. I'm I've got to protect myself, that kind of thing. It's just So, and this was about the point that I was like, okay, I'm calling it quits here. And so I pushed and I did that thing that we teach people to do, which is, I've got rapport with him. He still likes me.
You've been talking to him for like an hour.
Oh, yeah. Point. This was at least an hour.
Oh, yeah. I've had like 3 conversations because I'm in conversations next to this conversation. I keep hearing snippets and being like, what on earth is going on over there?
St. Norbert students coming and listening to like 10 minutes of it, and then there's like, okay, it's like they would move on, and it's just
then a lot of them would come talk to me because I'm right next to it.
What's going on with Josh and this guy?
Sometimes, as a side note, sometimes a crazy pro-choice person is a great advertisement for the rest of the table.
Right.
Because pro-choice people come over, they're walking by like, what is this? They hear some pro-choice person defending infanticide, and then they're like, that's not pro-choice people at all. And then they like want to come talk to me, and they like come running over and like want to apologize on behalf of this crazy pro-choice person, and I'm like, it's okay.
Understandable.
I know that not all pro-choice people are like that, and then I get in a great conversation
I've got the same instinct when pro-lifers are being super cringy on a college campus. So like, I totally get it.
Exactly.
And that can be very helpful. I mean, sometimes like it's sad when this is the case. And I know we've said this before, but there are times when you're dealing with a bullet biter person like this, and the best possible thing that can happen for good on this campus is not that this person's mind is going to get changed anytime soon, but it's that other people will overhear what he's saying.
Yeah.
And have that be a positive effect on them and get their wheels turning about, okay, well, there's got to be some more common ground that we have with pro-lifers and that kind of a thing.
Right.
And then we can have those conversations. So, well, no one was watching this. I'm just alone with this guy, and every once in a while people are overhearing. And so ultimately I pushed. I just kind of said, look, we can't find any common ground, which is unusual for me. Like I love finding common ground with people. I can find common ground with 99% of the people I talk to. We can't find common ground on anything other than like factual things like you are age 18. Like there's not a lot, like we've completely failed at common ground. I think I hope that you think about this conversation later. I'm hoping that you don't actually believe all the things you're saying. I think maybe you do. I don't know. But I hope that at least at some point you think back on this conversation and you remember it. I hope, and this is a little bit more eloquent probably than what I actually did at the moment, but whatever I said was along the lines of, one day when you realize that we shouldn't be able to kill 17-year-olds, which is a grossly offensive view that like almost basically nobody has. I've never heard anyone say that, and I've talked to so many people. One day when you figure that out, I really hope you think back to this conversation, because the reason that you and I cannot make any progress on the topic of abortion is because I can't convince you that we shouldn't be able to kill 16-year-olds. And it might be, maybe, that my view makes way more sense, even on the topic of abortion. But you're not getting to discover that because we're stuck way off the reservation, like that kind of thing. And so I hope that you think about this one day and you wonder, I wonder if I should rethink abortion because of that guy. Like basically, I hope that's what happens. He's like, it's like, I'll think about that or whatever. And he walked away. So that was that conversation. And I've now referred to this, like, this is like the most extreme kind of bullet biting situation I've ever had. I've never had a situation where someone's like, 17-year-olds don't have a right to life. It's like, wow. And I think he meant it. I really think he believed in that moment. I think he was being genuine. Like there's this, sometimes you can kind of tell, or at least I think I can tell. In this case, I think it was real. And I think utilitarianism is just a thing that is spreading. I think we're seeing fewer and fewer like strict moral relativists and more utilitarians. And we've been seeing that trend for 10 years now. And I think it's only going to continue.
So another big trend that I've been seeing over this past year, besides just the increase of utilitarianism, has been the increase in hostility from pro-choice people. And we've seen that in a couple of the stories already. But I had a really, really uplifting and really horrible conversation back to back at a recent outreach that I did.
Interesting.
That I think sums this up really, really well.
Yeah. Okay.
So I was at the University of Minnesota Duluth with one of our affiliate groups there. And I was helping them to do their very first ERI style outreach. I had done a public speech the night before on bodily autonomy. And then we were doing an outreach with them, coaching their club, all usual things.
Yeah.
And I had arguably the best abortion dialogue of my life, followed by the worst. So first, this girl comes up. I know, it was red letter day.
Clearly.
So we're sitting there for a little while, and it's a really slow morning. Like, we started pretty early, and there's no good locations on that campus to do tabling. Like, the one and only spot they're allowed to table, and they have all these tables set up, and there were other clubs there doing tabling. It's just an awful spot. There's like no traffic. They need to work on their situation, just like campus. But anyways, so it was really slow morning. It picked up around lunchtime. But I'm sitting there, and we've been there for like an hour, and I've talked to no one. Like, not a single person has even walked by. Right. And there's one other club simultaneously tabling. And I think it was a sorority. And they were tabling like further down. And their table was being run by this one girl who also was having no traction, like not talking to anybody. And so about an hour in, she just decided to abandon her table and walked over to ours.
What are you guys doing?
Exactly. I think out of boredom more than anything else. And
we're both talking to nobody.
Exactly. We may as well talk to each other.
Commiserate.
Yes. And so her name was Sophie. And Sophie was really interested in talking about abortion. Like, she came over, she didn't even know what our table was about, as you said, Josh. But she gets over there and she walks up to me and she's like, are you guys talking about abortion over here? Is that what this is? And I was like, yeah, we're just trying to create more productive political dialogue. Like my classic opening line.
We're totally here, not talking about abortion.
Yeah.
No one's coming.
Currently, no one's coming. And she was like, well, I totally agree that people can't talk about difficult issues. And I think that's really important. I'm like a poli-sci major. I'm really interested in this. Can we talk? Because I'm not talking to anybody right now. And I was like, totally. Yeah,
awesome.
Like, let's talk. And I sat and talked to her for 2 straight hours.
2 hours?
I talked to her through the entire lunch. I missed the lunch rush. All my other club members, they had a bunch of conversations. Sophie and I went off and sat in a corner, like on a ledge. And we had probably the best conversation I've ever had.
Wow.
It was fantastic. She was going through all of the different ideas. Like, she had a really well-defined pro-choice view, but she was also familiar with a bunch of other ones. Like, they'd had conversations about this in her poli-sci class. So she was incredibly intelligent and like knew the basics of arguments. And so we could just kind of go back and forth on an intellectual level, fast track. Exactly. It was super fun. I pulled out the outreach brochure. We talked through the graphic images, and she was just really emotionally affected by the whole conversation. And I would say by the time we got to the end, she was just thanking me for being there, thanking me for having these conversations, for being willing to talk to her for so long. And she left in a place of, I'm not positive what I think. I need more time to process, but I'm really grateful for you.
Yeah.
And I'll admit that I was really happy with where we ended and like just the fun I had in that conversation going back and forth with her. But there was a degree to which I was slightly disappointed that she hadn't like fully changed her mind. Because she was so close. And I just wanted her to go the rest of the way. But I think it's really important in a conversation to respect someone who says, I need more time to think about this. Like, I'm not in a mental place right now where I feel like I can commit, but I am acknowledging you've made good arguments and I know I need to go think about that. Yeah. Like, that's a great place to be.
Intellectual honesty.
Yes.
It takes most people a lot of time to think about it.
And it takes a lot of humility and courage to admit that to the person you just talked to.
Yeah.
It's in many ways easier to say, hey, guess what? You changed my mind.
Right.
When they really didn't, and you know that inside, and you're just kind of admitting it to get them to go away. I think it takes more courage to say, I don't know the answers.
Right. Especially given that clearly she had already thought a lot about this. And she kind of came ready to have a good dialogue about it. The fact that she left as opposed to somebody who's like not thought about it very much ever.
Yeah.
And she's like, I might need to rethink my entire position is a really, really significant thing for her.
So 2 hours are up and she's like, I should really go back to my table because she's had it abandoned just sitting there for 2 hours. And
she's
so she goes back.
Her own lunch rush
she's missed her own lunch rush. So So she goes back to her sorority table and she's, I don't know, maybe 50 feet from us. Like she could totally still overhear maybe really loud conversations that are happening. Like she's aware of what's happening at our table. She has a straight eye line sight to it. And as soon as I come out of that conversation, this couple walks up. And they're very clearly engaged, both in their body language and like you can see the ring and all that. Like they're clearly together and they are angry.
Wow.
They came up screaming.
Really?
Yes. Like they rounded the corner, saw the table, and like started yelling at me, who has just exited conversation. Like I am now free. I look free.
Okay.
Yes.
Did they come, like, was this a plan? Is this like a first degree thing or a second degree thing? Was this like because that made it sound like spontaneous, like they happen walking together and then they see this pro-life thing and they flip their lid. But
I mean, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't actually know because I wasn't available enough to notice if they'd walked by 6 other times and I've like been playing. Like I had been in a conversation up until 1 second before this happened.
Wow.
Like Sophie has just exited, is walking to her table. I turn and then I see people yelling at me. And I'm like, oh boy, this is going to be fun.
A stark contrast
it is a stark
situation.
Contrast.
Very hot to cold.
Yes. And so when I'm training a new club to do outreach, this does not happen very often. If you're listening to this and you're like, I've never done college outreach before and now I never want to.
Right.
Okay, this is not normal.
Yes.
At all.
Yeah.
And if it
I'm a
does
dude,
happen,
and I've almost never gotten like actually like really chewed out, yelled at. I've had like people like really mad at me, like they're really like more like disgusted with like what I'm doing. We don't usually get people that are actually like yelling at us, calling us names, things like that.
Yeah. So I am immediately like, I don't want one of the club members to take this.
Yeah.
Because I've got other club members around. And if I am there doing outreach with the first time club, it's like if there's something crazy, I will handle
You're
it.
gonna
I want you
jump
to go
on
have
the
positive
grenade.
experiences.
You're gonna get the pro-life Medal of Honor here. Okay.
And so I like non-aggressively start like walking towards them just a little bit, enough for them to be like, oh, she's the person that I should go talk to.
Yeah. And some space from the table.
Some space from the table. Correct. Yeah. And so they come over and I do the thing that I do in any hostile conversation. Like I've had a few over my time that have not been quite this level of yelling at me.
Yeah.
But anytime they come over and there's just a lot of emotion, I get asked this question. It's probably actually the number one question I get asked in Q&As. Not when I go to like a college campus to do a bodily autonomy speech. Like if I'm doing a speech at a pro-life conference or for a church or a pregnancy center banquet or like that kind of a thing where it's mostly pro-life people. Yeah. The number one question I get asked is, do you ever have people you just can't talk to? Like, what do you do if someone comes up and is really angry? Because that's their perception. I mean, usually when I'm in that setting, I'm doing the practical dialogue tips talk. Yeah. I'm talking about like ways to bring people's walls down. And so their first question is, well, I don't really believe that that's possible. Like, have you ever actually not been able to talk to someone? Because I'm confident you have. Like, you've had this experience.
Molly. Yeah.
Molly. You have Molly now. And so I, for the last few months, have told this story.
Yeah.
Because this is one of exactly 2 times that I can think of where I have been completely unable to communicate with a person.
Yeah.
All of my usual tricks fail because here's what I usually do. If someone comes up and they're really upset with me, I let them get it out.
Yeah.
I can take it. It's fine. Yeah. Like I'm not that fragile. Right. You can yell at me and I'm going to be fine.
Right.
And so I will just let them word vomit on me. All of the things that they need to.
Me too. Yeah.
And inevitably, what happens every time except these 2 times is after they've been going for several minutes of word vomit, they will eventually notice that I'm listening.
Yeah.
They like notice my body language and that I'm kind of like nodding along and I'm looking them in the eye and like I'm paying attention.
Yeah.
And they just go down a notch and they kind of slow down their speech. Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, this is interesting. And they keep going for maybe another minute.
Right.
And then they pause.
Yeah.
They get to like a pause in their argument. And I think it's a subconsciously deliberate thing that they want to see if I'm going to launch into my monologue now. Because they noticed the first thing they thought that I was going to do was yell back at them. Because what do you expect? If you're walking in like guns blazing into this battle, the first thing they expect me to do is scream back at them. And when I don't do that, and 5 minutes have gone by and I still haven't done that, and I've just been sitting listening. Now they're just going to test the water a little bit more. And so they pause just long enough that I could start into my monologue.
Right.
And I don't.
Right.
And they let the pause go a little longer. Now it's not like an I would really be interrupting them pause. It's like they are truly giving me an opening. And then I ask them a clarification question.
Yeah.
It's the first thing I do. Something based off of something they previously said. Yeah. And now they're like, oh, she really was listening to me.
Right.
Hold up. And now their wall is down. And for the most part, all the other tips work just fine, and we can continue. We can go from there. And some of the best conversations I've had have started that way, where I just needed to let them vent at me.
Yeah.
And that is just fine. And I behave in ways they don't expect, and then we move on. And so this couple comes up screaming at me, and I go into that mode. I start doing all the things, and I just let them go. I let them yell at me. And they give me the little pause, and I don't take it.
Yeah.
And then they give me a longer pause, and I take it with a question.
Yeah.
And they ignore my question and start screaming again.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh, this is new. Okay.
This is internal Emily.
Yeah, internal me in my head.
Curious.
Interesting response. I just asked, I think I had just asked if they thought there should be any restrictions on abortion. Like a classic opening question, because they hadn't really done anything to tell me what their view was in that whole monologue. It had been mostly just yelling about mine, yelling about pro-lifers kind of a thing. Yeah. And so I asked a related question. I don't honestly remember exactly what it was, but they didn't take it. They just continued yelling at me. Yeah. And after probably, another maybe 5 minutes of this, they asked me a question. I wouldn't really call it asking me a question, though. I would call it yelling me a question. Because there was no inquisitive tone about this.
Right.
And they asked me the question of rape.
Yeah.
In more of a do you actually think that a 10-year-old should be forced to go to screaming a question at me? And I started the way that I always do. I said, rape is one of the worst things that I know. And that was about all I got. Because then they screamed back at me, you're not actually going to answer the question, are you? And you actually hit the table.
Wow.
And I said, no, I have every intention of answering your question. But I think that I need, and I just think very similar to what you described earlier from Steve Wagner. Yeah. I need to be able to give this issue the seriousness that it deserves. Yeah. Because these are real people that have gone through this scenario. So I promise you I will answer your question. Yeah. I just need a minute. Yeah. And they said no. I was not allowed to have a minute. They wanted an answer and I wanted it now. Okay. And so I said, okay, look, I will give you my answer to the question of rape in a single word. Do I think it should be okay or not? Should you be able to have an abortion or not? But you must give me time to explain my answer. If you want just the answer first, you don't want to wait through my explanation, I'll inverse it. I'll give you the answer, but I have to be allowed to explain the reasoning behind said answer. They agreed to that. Okay. And so I said, I believe that abortion is wrong, even in the case of rape. Mm-hmm. And here is why. And they did actually this time let me get through my explanation.
They did.
Believe it or not. I was shocked. I was skeptical in the moment. I was like, should I even try this?
Twists and turns with this.
I was like, I'm going to try it. I'm at least going to give it a shot. Yeah. We got to the end of that. I could tell, they basically had stone faced through the entire thing. They did not, nothing I said in that whole thing got through to them. Yeah. And what he said back to me afterwards was, you just sound like a politician robot. Have you just memorized that answer? I said, no. I do have to give it a lot, but I actually care about this issue. Yeah. And I'm sorry if maybe the way that I said it didn't give you that perception, which I guarantee that it did. Okay, Josh, you see me do outreach. Yes. I am not saying this like a robot. Yeah. But I apologize. I'm I've been doing this all day. I'm out here. I'm tired. I've just been talking to people because I think this is really important to just have better conversations. Yeah. And then he launched back into screamy mode. He came off of screamy mode into talking mode for 2 seconds. The guy of the pair. Okay. Yes. So we had this engaged couple. Okay. Mostly the guy was doing most of the talking until the end. Interesting. He goes back and yells at me with another question. I think this time about incest, which is basically the same as my previous answer, but whatever. Right. And I start again, and this is when the girl interrupted. Ultimately, she kind of rejoined the conversation. Yeah. And started also screaming about how I was oppressing her, basically, by not
talking.
By my existence. The existence of pro-lifers were oppressing her.
You're doing this outreach.
Yes, exactly. And I ultimately, after about 5 more minutes of just this, we're getting nowhere. They let me half answer the question of rape, didn't like my answer, accused me of being a pro-life robot, and then just like kept screaming more questions that they wouldn't give me time to answer. Ultimately, this has been about 15 minutes. When they got to a momentary pause, I interrupted. Yeah. Which I do not do. Yeah. I interrupted them. I said, look, I'm not willing to have this conversation today. Yeah. Because it seems like you are more interested in yelling at me than in us actually having a conversation. And I think that this is the problem with our society.
Wow.
I think that people who have different ideas don't actually want to listen and try to understand each other. I have been listening to you and trying to understand where you're coming from for the past 15 minutes. Right. And you have not given me that same respect. Yeah. And so I understand this is a really emotional issue. If you calm down later in the day and you want to come back and have this conversation, I'm more than happy to talk to you. But right now, all that's happening is I'm getting screamed at, and that's not why I'm here. So have a nice day. Wow. And I put my hand out. They did not shake my hand. Right. They walked away and continued screaming while they walked away. Wow. I was actually shocked they did walk away. But they like turned, basically the girlfriend grabbed the guy friend and kind of dragged him away. And they like, as they round the corner, continued screaming about me and the patriarchy and how I was an instrument of oppression by my existence. Yeah. I get to the end of that and I am like, I'm emotionally done. I'm okay, I need a moment. Yeah. And within two seconds, like I just kind of like turned around and like looked at the wall that was behind us. And I was like, okay, I need to recenter for myself for a second. Right. And I turned back around and Sophie was there. She had walked over from her table. She'd overheard that entire thing. I mean, they were screaming, okay? It was impossible not to.
See, I've forgotten about Sophie.
You've forgotten about Sophie at this point. Sophie is right there, and she gave me a hug.
Really?
Like, unprompted. Aww. She was just like, you look like you could use a hug. I'm so sorry. Wow. She apologized on behalf of the couple.
That's so nice.
And she said, I'm so sorry that they treated you that way. I just talked to you for the last 2 hours, and you are so reasonable and respectful, and they weren't willing to just hear you out. I understand where they're coming from, because I kind of felt that same anger when I first realized you were pro-life. When I walked over to start talking to you, I felt that come up in me, and I feel like I could have become them really quickly. Yeah. Because I felt like you were trying to take away my rights. Like, this conversation happening at the Supreme Court has made me all the more aware of this and the more upset. So I get where they're coming from, because I think I was almost them. Yeah. But that's never acceptable, and you don't deserve that. And so I just want to apologize that you had to deal with that.
Wow. That's really cool.
It was just a very heartwarming experience to know that while there are going to be horrible conversations like that couple, they're going to happen. Yep. And that is not most pro-choice people. Yeah. And even other people like Sophie noticed that conversation, noticed how unhelpful it was. Yeah. And I had been able to make such an impact on her that she wanted to come back over and say that. Yeah.
This is a really important thing for people to notice. What you just, I want to underline this, because the charity that you're having, where you're like, look, okay, yeah, this went really badly. I could use all kinds of curse words to describe how bad that conversation went, but I won't. Yeah. But you're like, this is not most people. No. This is an extreme. And so it's like, but so often people on both sides, especially if you listen to a lot of mainstream media on either end, you are seeing the worst of the other side amplified. And that is on purpose. That is an actual strategy. And so it's so easy for people to think of we think of the most reasonable versions of our side and be like, that's the standard our side thing. But then like the craziest, meanest version on the other side, that's what they're all like. Or the Twitterverse. It's like Twitter's not normal people. This is not, like, you need to realize, right. That's not where the average person is coming from. There's an internet warrior thing. Instead, you will still have occasionally like interesting people and everything like that. Like fine, but like that's not the normal person. And so I think we just need to like kind of guard our heart, for lack of a less kind of religious version of that phrase, and just be careful and like how we're thinking, especially once we've had bad personal experiences with the other side. It's so easy to just like, okay, now that's going to form. I guess where a lot of the anger and stuff comes from when people are all angry now when they talk to people on the other side. It's like they've had one really bad experience with someone on the other side. And now every future person from that side that talks to that person is going to get a little bit of the brunt of that because it just affects us if we're not super intentional about it. One other thing I want to point out about your story, and then we can move on, is, and I know we talk about this sometimes. I feel like I talk about this a lot in my Q&As now. Like it's become a recurring theme. So now I don't even remember if we've talked about it on the podcast, but probably.
Yeah.
But as a reminder, because pro-lifers can be very bad about this. And Christians specifically, I think, can be very bad about this. And this is why that you and I get asked so often, how do you deal with like really unreasonable people? Like the version of the question I feel like I get most often is like, do you ever end a conversation? Like, are you ever the one that ends a conversation? And we've got an article on the blog that I wrote a really long time ago. It's like, here's like a few times a context where I do end a conversation on my own. And here's kind of how to do that in a gracious way. But like just the mere fact that you should sometimes end conversations is so important for people to understand, because people can be so bad at self-care. And self-care is so important at an outreach. Like you needed a moment to recenter. Some people would need a week to recenter, but even you knew, okay, here's what I need right now to process this quickly and be able to do what my responsibilities are, at least for the rest of this day, and then maybe process. But I think just generally speaking, Christians are very bad at that. We think that if God has given us this opportunity to reach this person on, that's lost, this lost person, then like we kind of like have this like divine mandate that we need to take as much time with them as we possibly can and hope that, these good things happen. And then we don't take care of ourselves and we let ourselves get treated like crap. Like that just happens. Am I going to have to bleep that one out for you? Now I'm like, I don't even know what to do. But my friend Jonalyn one time, she said it the best way I've ever heard someone say. She said, Christians have a bad habit of force feeding people arguments who don't want to hear them. And it's just like, I'm just going to keep on. It's like, we're not really paying attention to like what their reaction is. Yeah. We're just doing our thing. And we need to stop that. If anything, sometimes you're doing more harm than good. If they're not ready to hear it, this is not the time. You can kind of set them like they can get more entrenched against your view because of the emotional place that they're in right now or whatever. It's like, and I'm looking for that. And if it's just like if they seem really close-minded, or if they keep on accusing me of being horrible things after I've explained multiple times and given evidence that I'm not, like all of those different things, like I've got better things to do with my time. I'd rather try to find someone open-minded to talk to, and maybe like really cool stuff can happen. And that's cool stuff happens when open-minded people talk to each other. Open-minded, closed-minded people, not so much. It's not as good. And so even though we are sometimes seen by certain pro-lifers as being kind of the pansies of the pro-life movement who like are super non-confrontational and don't want to offend anybody, like the way that you stood up for yourself to that couple who were grossly mistreating you, I think it's like that's the kind of thing that we do. We do that at outreach when we, at some point, if we need to kind of like, we're going to stand up for ourselves now. Because we've given them a chance to vent, and now they're just like in pure, like, I'm just going to mistreat this person mode. Yeah. Like, we don't just let people do whatever they want to us at an outreach, even if there's not another person available to talk to. Like, I would have ended the conversation and have no conversation the rest of the day, as opposed to get mistreated for an hour instead of 15 minutes. So I think that you handled that really, really well. I hate that it happened to you, but I think we've learned some really valuable things from the way that you handled that situation.
Yeah, well, thank you. I know you had a not so pleasant.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of a situation we had at Boston College. So I got to go to Boston College. I got to speak there for the second time recently and work with their club. Are they an affiliate group?
They are, yes.
Okay. Like I can never remember at this point. So I got to work with the affiliate group there. They were awesome. very organized. It was very easy to kind of do my part of it. We did outreach inside because it's Boston and it was freezing outside. You know,
Yeah.
it's like
it was like February.
it was like I think it was February. So I think it was like 35, maybe 40 degrees outside. And so it's like it's not horrible, but no one's super comfortable for more than an hour out there. And we want to be able to talk to people. So we're inside the, kind of the student commons, area. And we've kind of said there's great traffic. It's fine. It's really kind of crowded, the way the furniture is and stuff. That was kind of hard to deal with. But beyond that, again, my role is basically I'm coaching their club into doing this. Andrew from our staff who lives in Boston, he was able to come and I made him get in some conversations because he has a lot less experience doing outreach than we do. And so anytime I can get Andrew talking to people, we do that. But the story that stands out the most from that day happened to one of the club members, and I don't remember his name, but he handled it really well. He wasn't one of the most experienced members of the club, so this wasn't the most optimal thing to happen to him. But in the end, I think he handled it really well. What he basically had to do was a 15 versus 1 quote unquote conversation.
Big yikes.
Which is more like the conversation you had. And they weren't yelling or anything, but it was like kind of an intense interrogation / Q&A kind of a situation. But I shouldn't call it a Q&A because ultimately it was more, they were all lecturing at him and he's listening. But he's not really getting a chance to say anything. So he's trying to do body language. He's trying to do common ground with the things that he can kind of agree with that they're saying or whatever. But he's trying to kind of get a word in edgewise and it's not really happening. But they keep on asking him questions. And that was the thing that was hard for him was he was it would have made more sense if they just yelled at me for a while. I need you to hear my opinions about this thing. And then just go. And I think they would have been like, okay, I'll just listen. Here's super nice, reminds me a lot of kind of the way that I am at an outreach in the sense of if he was going to err on the side of being too confrontational or not confrontational enough, he was going to err on the side of being too nice, which is the same side that I often err on. And so that's kind of where he's at. But what's confusing for him is they kept on asking him questions, but he wouldn't get a chance to answer. Then someone else would jump in and be like, yeah, and then they're keep on doing this thing. And he's like, what do I do? And so, and I wasn't even able to be there for him really, because again, the way that all this furniture is, it was too late. I would have had to come in from the other side. It was just a really weird thing.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to basically, I can barely even hear the conversation to coach him after, but I know this is happening and I'm paying attention so that I can jump in if I need to, but I'm watching and it seems like he's doing okay. So ultimately what he does is after being asked another question, he finally gets in a word in edgewise and says, okay, I've logged 5 questions now. Could I answer that one? And they said, no. And then they started asking more questions.
They said no?
Yes. Someone literally said no. And then they started asking more quote unquote questions. These aren't really questions at this point,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
They're arguments with question marks on them.
That you didn't actually want an answer to.
That they didn't really want his answer to. And so, eventually, basically, they got everything out of their system and left. He never got a chance to do anything, really.
Yeah.
And so then I'm gonna debrief with him. and he's okay. He's not. I mean, he's a little worse for the wear, I think, but he's okay. And he was just talking about I was having a hard time knowing what to do in this situation. And so we talked about self-care and how he doesn't need to let anything literally happen to him, and there is a point to leave. And I said, and it's just hard sometimes to figure out when is the point that you draw that line. That is a very fuzzy line. And sometimes it takes some experience of, missing the line sometimes to figure out where the line is. And in his case, I said, look, I can tell you one very clear line. And it was the point when you asked them if you could answer one of their 5 questions and they said no and kept asking you more. That is a very clear, it would have been perfectly acceptable for you to say, then I'm gone, because at this point, this is not, and just do basically what you did. I would have basically said, this is how you responded, because they're being so unfair and uncharitable. And any reasonable member of that group, after everyone calms down later that day, could look back on it and reasonably see this isn't how that should have gone down. We should have at least let the kid answer one of our questions, or whatever. If not, maybe even two of them. So
what a concept.
So that was helpful for him to kind of see, okay. So, here's kind of a good boundary to draw. And I think this kind of thing is going to happen more often. Like, again, we're seeing this trend, and some of our stories are kind of like indicating like people's emotions are high. We've been predicting this for a while now. We knew Dobbs was coming. Things were getting worse before Dobbs, too, like, and for multiple reasons. But as we've been saying all year, this is going to be the hardest year for pro-life, pro-choice dialogue in at least 30, like in our lifetimes. And I mean, maybe 2023 will be even worse. I sure hope not. But like, I don't know. But that is the trend. Is it's getting harder? And so you are going to see more angry people at outreach. You're going to see more terrified pro-choice people on campus. You're going to see more Handmaid's Tale costumes. You're going to see more groups just kind of going after whatever pro-lifer they can. Like these protests in front of our stuff. We've got some stories we're going to do in part 2 because obviously we need to do a part 2 on this. Yep. And we have more stories. So we'll kind of wrap it up here. But like, as we're going to continue to indicate, like some kind of rowdy things are happening on some of the campuses. And I think we can deal with all of them. It's not like it's not dangerous or anything like that. It's just like there's some new kind of tricky things that our clubs are having to try to figure out how to deal with. And we're coaching them kind of through that. And I think just pro-lifers should just try to be kind of ready for that. Be ready for how you're going. How do you think about how much sort of, quote unquote abuse should you take from someone before you're just like, okay, I'm done letting you vent at me and something else needs to happen now. Like you should be thinking about that ahead of time. Your clubs should be thinking about how we're going to handle a difficult situation. Like what you did, where you're like, I'm going to sort of like, see this couple coming, and for the sake of that club, you intercepted them. You literally went out and intercepted them so that they could have a conversation. And we've got an article that Rachel wrote a long time ago that like talks like specifically about that, or maybe it was me. I don't know. One of us wrote an article about like there are people that like you should designate people for that, and someone's going to need to fall on the grenade so it doesn't mess up all of the conversations. Like there's things that we can do to prep, but it just means, and this is going to be the drum I'm banging like all here, is we need to get more and more equipped. Like this is the time. This is not boot camp in peacetime anymore. This is like, if you don't come to outreach ready, you might get chewed up a little bit. It might not go as well. And I don't want people to have a really bad outreach experience, especially if it's their first outreach experience. And so,
but you also still need to be doing outreach.
Yes.
Because the easy other takeaway from this would be to say, outreach right now is too scary. Let's back off.
Yeah.
And I've had some incredible conversations. Sophie is an amazing example from here. In part 2, I'm going to tell probably my favorite speech story of all time. And
it's an amazing
story.
Come back for it.
Yes.
We'll open the next one with that one. It's so good.
So my point being, there has never been a more important time to do outreach because people are thinking about abortion more than ever right now.
Yes.
And you have an opportunity to seize that moment where they're thinking about this and make an impact.
Yeah.
But that also means you need to be prepared in maybe a little bit of a different, more robust way than you needed to be before.
Yeah. So having said that, check back in a couple of weeks, and we will continue this conversation of stories and specifically even more like spending more time on some trends that we're seeing from our outreach experiences from the last 8 or 9 months.